New Day. There are currently more than 200 clinical trials open to patients at Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. These trials often turn scientific research into life-saving discoveries. Here with us is the medical director for thoracic, head and neck oncology, Dr. Renato Martins. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So there are all sorts of groundbreaking clinical trials, and you have this partnership, as we mentioned, with Fred Hutch, with the UW, and with Seattle Children. So how does this relationship and partnership benefit a patient?
I think that the population of Seattle is, and the whole region, in fact, is extremely fortunate to have these powerhouse of research, working together to solve this big problem of cancer. If you look at the very competitive grants from the government for research, certainly both Fred Hutch, the University of Washington, and Children's in the area of pediatrics get lots of these very competitive grants, which is a testimony to the quality of the research that they are able to produce.
Right, they don't just hand these out like candy. You have to earn them through the way that you do your research. And this sort of clinical trial, all of these have led to breakthroughs around the country, but especially here. What kinds of things would we recognize as, groundbreaking treatments that have resulted from trials?
So, obviously the first of the Nobel Prizes that the Hutch won was in the area of bone marrow transplantation. And, this is really where everything happened. And now there are thousands and thousands of patients that have been transplanted and have their life saved by it. The biggest really groundbreaking thing over the last few years on oncology has been immunotherapy. This ability of the body itself to fight the cancer. And a lot of the basic research that led to that also comes from here.
Now explain to us what this is, because to me this is so amazing. It eliminates chemotherapy. It lets your body tell the doctor what it is that we need to, go after the cancer. Tell us how this works.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating. So cancer cells are very smart. One of the ways they evade our ability to destroy them is by sending a signal to our defense cells to do nothing. And now we have medications that block that signal. So that connection between the cancer cell and your immune cell saying don't do anything is broken. And the immune cells then can see the cancer cells and kill them.
So we're eliminating the disinformation that's going on in our bodies.
That's right.
It's amazing to me. So if somebody is first diagnosed with cancer, obviously they've got a lot on their plate, a lot they're thinking about. Should they also know about clinical trials at that point? Yeah,
so our goal at the SCCA is to offer to everybody, irrespective of the stage or their diagnosis, the option of receiving the standard of care or the participation in a clinical trial. And clinical trials have changed tremendously. I started my career in oncology 20 years ago, and back then clinical trials were all variations of chemotherapy, and I'll be the first one to admit that they didn't work that great. But now it's completely different. We really have drugs and treatments in general that are making a big difference on patients' outcome. And that being the case, I would say that in the area that I work, lung cancer, of all the drugs that make a difference in lung cancer, they were tested first at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. So participation in a clinical trial means, do you want to get the treatment of tomorrow, today? Because these drugs and treatments will become standard of care, but it will be 2 or 3 years from now. And who would not want to get, the standard of tomorrow today? Right.
How do you find out about these trials? When you come in as a new patient, you've got so many going on. How do we navigate?
So we present to patients, here's your options. If we go with the standard of care, this is what would happen. And we have this other option of this clinical trial, which obviously most of the time we are not sure that it will be better than the standard of care, because if we were, it wouldn't be a clinical trial. But we may have sometimes pretty strong evidence that it may move outcomes forward.
And so I imagine there are some people who would rather stick with what's current and others who don't mind moving into the trials. How do they make that decision?
So the process of consenting for a clinical trial is something that it's very structured. You know, you have the discussion with the physician, but you also have sometimes multiple pages that the patient has to read that will explain to them what would be the standard of care and the outcomes and toxicities associated with that, as well as what one can expect from the participation in the clinical trial, how that would be different from what you would do if you were not in the clinical trial.
Right. And I imagine that we owe a debt of gratitude to people who've done this, right? Because they help bring these advances into the standard of care, as you mentioned.
Right, but it's also important that patients get their benefit from treatment.
Their best treatment, of course.
And I always like to talk about someone that I saw recently because otherwise it's like, what does that mean? It's once in a lifetime kind of thing. And just this Friday, I saw a patient that came to us after not having responded to the initial therapy that she received. And the first trial of immunotherapy in lung cancer was conducted at the SCCA and other centers as well. That has now been published a few years ago. And she was actually in one of them. And she had a tremendous response to immunotherapy. The trial had a design that you receive for X number of months and then you stop therapy. And despite the fact that she has advanced lung cancer, her disease has not manifested itself now for years. And
That's
she's living a
amazing.
completely normal life.
That is amazing. Thank you for that example. We appreciate it. To review the clinical trials currently open for patients, please visit SCCA's website. We will also post a link for you on our homepage. It's well worth a look. Next up, how Seattle Cancer Care Alliance's medical nutrition therapy addresses patient care from prevention all the way to survivorship. After this.
Today's special edition of New Day Northwest is sponsored by Seattle Cancer Care Alliance.